kinds of things people are doing on LinkedIn are different. The way to reach them is fundamentally different than what you're doing on Facebook. And we can spend a little bit more time talking about it. Now, I think over the last 2 to 3 years, social media has been this brave new world that everyone is a little terrified about. It's been really heartening to see a pretty strong, significant evolution over the last year in terms of agencies and marketers really now getting what to do. But I think the rules that apply on social media are fundamentally different, and there's still a lot of education to be done. But I think one of the big things that companies need to understand is that in today's media landscape, as you all know, the way to engage an audience is different. It's not simply about pushing messages out, telling customers what to buy. They're expecting to have a conversation with you. Now, in order for you to engage in a conversation, you need to begin with a foundation of trust. You've got to have credibility, and social media is a great opportunity to do that. So many of the most successful campaigns for brands and for brands on LinkedIn have been campaigns about cultivating and building a community. First, attracting an audience, having a relationship of trust that you build with them, and then once you've established trust, leveraging that community to achieve your broader marketing goals. And there's a process to doing that, which I'm happy to talk about. But there are a lot of sort of fundamentals that are different. And again, what we love to see is, what we're excited to see is that, especially here in India, we've seen a real transformation in how organizations are beginning to think about social media. I had the good fortune of speaking in front of NASSCOM last year at a major conference, and we were having a discussion about LinkedIn at that point. And I think the kinds of questions we were getting were relatively basic. Today, a year later, I spoke in July, and it was a completely different conversation. And it's really exciting to see that development. I think it's still got a ways to go everywhere around the world, but I think we're on the right path. And again, we can share best practices. We can share. I'm happy to share stories about what people are doing that has turned out to work.
Great, thanks. How many of you are employed by media companies? Show of hands.
Wow.
Thank you, Bhaskar. The International News Media Marketing Association, or INMA, is a nonprofit association with about 6,000 members at 500 of the top news media companies worldwide in about 80 countries. And as Rashad suggested, my job is to meet with as many of them as I can, crowdsource the best ideas, and try to bring those best practices to the table. That's what we do. And for this panel discussion, I tried to tap the INMA network to find some new ideas related to social media. Social media traditionally for newspapers began in about 2007 with Twitter feeds and Facebook and LinkedIn. But I think that we are about to hear in this panel that we've turned the page, we've advanced the agenda quite a bit in the last year. In fact, I'd like to sort of begin this with 4 key points for media companies that sort of go beyond that traditional strategy of Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Point number 1, as we look for new value in things that we've traditionally done, sharing has become the value-added special sauce for journalism online. And what we see when we look out over the landscape, that newspaper websites that have robust sharing capabilities are seeing an increase in engagement and an increase in audience. And maybe we can talk about that later. Point number 2, especially for media companies, what do we hear all the time? We hear that smaller companies, individuals can replicate what we do, and I don't believe that's true. And in fact, I would say that leveraging our scale to create an echo chamber for our content is a critical strategy, emerging strategy, for why we need to be in this space. Number 3, I believe that we have to become the curators of the conversation with our audiences and our communities. So it's not just enabling the chatter, enabling the feedback, but how do you structure it? How do you prioritize it? How do you make sense of it for your audiences? And then finally, I think the part that we have not done as an industry is projecting newspapers and news brands as a trusted voice on social media platforms, and then finding value-added ways to bring that conversation back to websites. I believe, in fact, that what newspapers need to be doing is resourcing and committing resources to 1, 2, 3 people at these companies and going out there and being trusted voices out in the community, out in the blogosphere, and eventually create link backs to the website, but be that trusted voice and help humanize the newspaper brand.
Perfect, great. So to sort of summarize, there are 3 big things that you've heard today so far. One is about people, and that was the point that all 3 of our speakers have made. And one way of looking at social media is not to use the word social or media, and instead to use the word people's network. So you should ask yourself, how are you as a marketer, as a media company, as an agency, as a client, engaging with the people's network? And the people's network is not new. Word of mouth was always very, very powerful. The difference is, in the old days, word of mouth did not scale. But today, word of mouth scales. So, yesterday I might have said, I don't like something, and no one would have listened. Today I tweet out, I don't like something, and if some of my followers retweet it, I can reach 1 million people in 15 minutes. That's the people's network, and that's very powerful, and therefore understanding people is as, if not more important than understanding platforms. Not that platforms don't matter, but that's one key thing. The second, to the point that was made by Earl, it's very, very important to keep in mind that this can be positive for your business. That in many ways, uncertainty tends to be actually good for market leaders. Because if people are very uncertain, they don't know what to shift to. But they definitely know what to shift to if the market leaders act like stupid fools, right? Then they say, well, these people definitely don't get it. Interestingly, not only the news media organizations, but look at television. Today, television usage in America is at an all-time high. And one of the reasons why television usage is at an all-time high is because of the people's network. People are sharing and talking about the television shows that they're watching, and they're spreading that around. So this is a pal and not necessarily an enemy. All 3 of these folks made the reference to organizational challenges. A line that we use is, the future does not fit in the containers of the past, and the future does not fit in the mindsets of the past. And interestingly, the single biggest challenge that all of us will have is primarily that the future is different. One thing I can be very certain about is the future is different, and we keep trying to bring it into our organizations. And whenever we put out press releases saying we're going to change things, I ask a very simple question to anybody. Could you please explain to me what your incentive systems are? If your incentive systems are to continue to reward people for current behavior, it doesn't matter what you're saying. If the way you make money is the old way, then that's the way you will work. And that's very, very important. The future does not fit in the containers of the past. So those are 3 key things. Now let's twist it to a little bit different. And I'm going to ask Arvind to talk a little bit about, in more detail, about the key leaders, including one that we heard a little bit earlier today from, because I think they'll still be around. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google+.
So, I prefer to really not talk about other companies, except at a high level. These are all great companies.
Well, they're all great companies. I'm not saying make fun of them. Yeah. I say celebrate them. So make them smart.
Okay, sure. Well, I think they've each transformed the world in their own unique ways. And it's interesting, if any of these companies had begun by doing a focus group and asking people, describing the service and asking people, what do you think you'd buy from it or use this service? I think everyone would have said, no way. I think if LinkedIn had done a focus group and said, well, let's describe what this is, and people said, well, it's ridiculous. Why would I do it? In fact, I joined LinkedIn on the first day. I think I was the 49th member. And I joined because someone asked me to do it. I didn't get any value out of it for a while until the network grew big enough. And I think it's true for all these companies. Again, if you'd asked, Google is so transformative now, But I remember when Google started, my cousin was an early employee there, but at the time, people were going, why would we need another search engine? You know, we have Yahoo, we have Alta Vista. I'm trying to remember the names of these. Excite, remember Excite? These were the winners already, and Google completely changed it. So again, they had a core, really strong idea they completely believed in when no one else did, and turned into something really remarkable. But I think we're all going after the world in slightly different ways. And let me speak a little bit about LinkedIn. You know, our mission is to connect the world's professionals to make them more productive and successful. So it's completely about your professional life. It's not about games. It's not about exchanging photographs with your family. And people are using it to really become smarter in their career, become better professionals. And one of the most interesting things that we've done recently is done a lot more work with media companies. Earl and I were just talking about this earlier today, but we're now seeing a really explosion of news sharing on LinkedIn. And the reason, and people are doing different kinds of sharing on LinkedIn than they're doing, for example, on Twitter and Facebook. What they're doing is sharing professional content with colleagues. And they're doing it in a way that where everything that they're sharing is a reflection of their professional brand. What that means is they're not sharing, for the most part, even though they could, they're not sharing their favorite sandwich they ate yesterday. They're not sharing about a cool movie they saw. They're sharing about an article they read that was very interesting. They're sharing some new insight they got from a colleague. And so that kind of context is very, very different from the kinds of things people are doing on Facebook. Now, Twitter is a bit of an overlap. I mean, Twitter is a broadcast platform that integrates with everything and integrates with LinkedIn. They're a partner of ours. But the kinds of things that people are doing on LinkedIn, again, is quite different. You know, Google is an amazing company. I mean, what they've done in search is remarkable, transformed advertising. With Google+, I guess I don't know. I'm still not sure how Google+ will fit into the broader ecosystem. But, you know, I think it'll be entertaining for everyone to watch.
Great. You mentioned sharing. If you go to the New York Times on the web or on your phone or on your iPad, you'll notice that one of the tabs on the top is most shared, most emailed. Do you know that it's the most popular way people actually now read the newspaper? Talk a little bit about sharing in the news organizations.
Well, one of the, among the key motivators to share are emotion, power, identity, information. In fact, the New York Times came out, as many of you know, they put up a paywall, a paid content strategy. But one of the workarounds of that paywall is that if you share content, you can get free access to it. So I, the sharer, have the power to share with you, and now then you can click through, link back to the New York Times without paying. And the thought process apparently behind that is a study that they did called The Psychology of Sharing. And that internal survey, or that report, essentially made the following 4 or 5 points. That sharing information allows the sharer, and media owners, listen to this, sharing information allows the sharer to remember more, search for more, explore more, control more, and read more. We are an industry that is obsessed with quality journalism, an unrealistically high degree of quality journalism. If you were to rate our quality from 0 to 100 and realize our newsrooms are always aiming for 100%, what the New York Times research seems to suggest is that you could probably accept a little less in quality and implement a little bit more in sharing and create a better user experience in the process. So I would just say to you that the power of sharing apparently is insanely powerful.
And now Kate is in charge of a lot of different things. And she's going to explain why and what she does, and why in the world she has the job she has, and both the risks and benefits of sharing and communicating with the people out there. Far away.
Well, I'd like to start by picking up on Earl's point about sharing and about aiming for quality or not quality. Quality is quite an abstract measure, and we have had a long tradition of editors deciding on quality and what they believe. And mostly they do a remarkably good job of it. But one of the best things about my job really is that I feel as though I'm a representative of readers in a broad sense in the newsroom. because sometimes what we think is our best content isn't what readers think is the best content, or stories that we think are important but not hugely significant, readers are suggesting on Twitter or on Facebook or on LinkedIn or in the comments on our website that they're much more important than we thought they were. And that brings me to one of the reasons we do this. A lot of people do social media now in some way because it's the cool thing to do, but actually me going to our CEO and saying, hey, we should do social media because it's cool, it's not going to cut it. So we've got 4 broad reasons, and one of them is that measure of quality. It's about improving our journalism. It's about looking again at the kinds of stories we're covering. Is there a different way to do this? Can we find a different eyewitness who can add something else who we didn't find through our traditional channels? Is there a story out there? There was last week, for example, there was a murder case in Scotland, and there was a suggestion that this murder was because the guy was homosexual. And we reported it, we covered it, article went in the paper. It wasn't a huge story. Very sadly, there are lots of murders, they very rarely make the front page unless there's something particularly unusual about them. But on the web, there was a huge amount of conversation around this particular story. And we realized quite quickly that there was much more interest in it than we'd thought there'd be. And we went back and looked again and did some more reporting on it and more investigation into it, and the story developed through the week. And that might seem quite a small case, it's just one story, but if you start introducing reader views back into the newsroom in that way, you can really, we believe, enrich your journalism and add a different dimension to the kind of stories you're telling. And sometimes it's about stories you've missed, sometimes it's about introducing a reader's view on something. If everybody's debating Europe at the moment and the Eurozone crisis, what do our readers think of that? Which bits of the story haven't they understood or would they like to know more about? We can have one perspective from our editors, but if we can challenge that with views from a really engaged and informed readership, then that's all the better. But this is also partly about loyalty in a digital world where we know that our readers get news and information from all over the world, from newspapers, magazines, TV stations, radio stations, all over the world. And that's fantastic. We're also never going to stop it, even if it wasn't fantastic. But there's still a place for feeling like a Telegraph reader. And if we can create that sense of a club, that sense of belonging, that sense of like-minded people, and we can use social media and comments on our site to bring people in, then we can hopefully build a more loyal digital audience, one that doesn't jump in and out of Google and never come back to us and not even remember that the article they read was on the Telegraph, but one that starts choosing the Telegraph for their news. The third reason is audience growth. Social media gives you a great way to find people who are interested in a topic. Maybe they're talking about cricket, but they don't know about our cricket correspondent, or they haven't found our coverage. If our cricket correspondent is active on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, they can go out and join those conversations and start bringing readers back to a particular area of our coverage and hopefully convert those readers into more regular readers. And the final reason, which sort of takes me outside of the newsroom, which is where I trained and where I belong, really, many would say, and into the rest of the business and over onto the side of more of our commercial teams. We're getting increasing numbers of requests from advertisers to market to our social media audiences. Sometimes they obviously want to come and buy adverts in the paper, or they want to come and advertise on the website. But some want to come and advertise to our Facebook audience specifically. And they're telling us that they want to do that, partly because we know a lot about them. Facebook provides a lot of data about them. And partly because they fit that demographic and they are going after an audience on Facebook. They believe, perhaps in the case of LinkedIn, that they're going to get a different kind of person or a person at a different point in their day if they've come in from LinkedIn than if they've come in from Facebook. So increasingly, this isn't something we're just doing from a Telegraph perspective to enhance what we're doing. It's something advertisers are demanding that we do. And my job is really to both be that advocate for readers, to help journalists use these tools to go and dig out stories and find new leads, but also to help manage the balance between being able to sell this engaged audience and sell against this engaged audience and sell to them, but do that in a way that it doesn't undermine our editorial credibility. So sitting between the two camps is very much where I see myself. And I figure out that minefield, if you like, by coming back to the readers. I'm there for readers. And if it makes sense for them, and we're giving them good opportunities, and we're listening to them, and it's working for them, we've probably got the balance about right.
Great, perfect. So Kate, you've given a good explanation of if you're a media company